ask me all the time, where are you from? So for my students, I always say, well, 5 extra points if you can guess where I'm from. I get all sorts of answers. Cambodia was one, actually. A lot of people say many things. So very briefly, I was, those of you who were at Siraj's defense yesterday, you probably know that there is some connection to Bangladesh somewhere. So that's where I was born, but it was Pakistan at that time. So you know that I'm at least older than, what is it, 30 years, older than 30. So it was Pakistan at that time, and then my father was in the army. I was brought up as an army brat, went all over the place. Came to, then I went to the US in 1982. Got my PhD, came to Norway for a visiting position for 1 semester, and then I stayed on for another year and a half. And at that time, my chairman likes to say that I had actually a choice because I had offers from Singapore, from Hawaii, and from Kristiansand in Norway, and I chose to be in Kristiansand. So that says something about myself. Right. My research areas actually right now is ICT for development, e-government, research methods, and also about how the relationship between academia and practice. Is it a question of informing? People talk about this divide. We talk about there's no mutual informing. But I think the problem is people do that. Mutual informing simply means that we do not inform practice what we're doing. But the main question, and then there are many ways that I've suggested to solve this problem. You know, we have practitioner academic forums, for example. You write for practitioners. I do not believe that academic articles should be written for practitioners in any case, because they don't understand, they don't care. And so if you talk about ingestion, we talk about structurist, he goes, oh, what does that mean? I do believe that academics should write for practitioners, but not through academic journals, which is some sort of form. But I think the problem, though, is that if we inform the public, of the vast unwashed, as one of my academic colleagues once put it, then the main question is, are they interested in what we're producing? Is it evidence-based? So if it is something that they're not interested, and if it's something that the research that we do is not relevant, then by improving this informing, what we have actually done is we've come up with a beautiful system for informing people about basically crap. It's just a better way of doing it. You know? It's useless, but now I know a very nice way of to tell you what it is. So the bigger problem is I think the production issue. Is the knowledge that we produce, is that very useful or not? So a lot of my work is tied towards that. So when I talk about research method, is it a method of producing knowledge, co-producing knowledge that is useful? And then if we involve users in, or I should say the practitioners in the co-production of this knowledge, then by definition it's relevant. So that's what guides me. So this work that I'm doing now is on intermediaries. So now yesterday, we talked about the middlemen, the Bataris, and all the portrayed as villains in Indian movies, and more so in Bangladeshi movies, by the way. If you take one look at those, you will know this person is evil. Goes around, exploits people, you know, and so on and so on. And they do all sorts of other stuff, and plundering and pillaging. And I don't know figure out what the difference between plundering and pillaging. So, I'm guilty of plundering, but not guilty of pillaging. So there must be something in there. I assume it's a semantics. But in a way, today, I'm here to defend these middlemen. So why am I doing this? Well, it started off with my work on e-government. So I'll start off by talking about this intermediaries and e-government context. So here's the problem. On one hand, you have got this e-government services, all sorts of things, local value, talk about that, many. That's actually what it's meant for practice. So you have the citizens at the other end. These government services are meant to be used by citizens. happens? Well, here's what happens. They do not reach citizens. Why is that? Here are some of the reasons. One is there's no physical access. They do not have access at all. Mobile phones have had a way of addressing this issue. And even if they have access, they're not aware of what services are available. It's like, I mean, I do not know a lot of stuff, and then I know, well, I'd like to think that I'm a little bit savvy about these things, but then some people say, you know, you're eligible for this, or you're applying. I said, really? Well, there you go. So all sorts of things are all hidden somewhere, and sometimes when I ask these people, they say, go to this site or that site, and then you will know. So that's one aspect. And even if it is, if I know that these services are available, I do not know where they're available. So right now, I'm very concerned about pension. I want to know if I can retire, how soon I can retire. And they said, well, such and such department has got all that information on the website. I said, where are these? So why you go to this and so on. So that's an example. If I did not know these services were available, and even if I knew, I did not know where they are. When you say this competence, this is a generic term actually, which encompasses a whole lot of things. It's that I do not know how to, one might say, it's fairly simple to go on the website. But then to combine these various types of information, I do not know how to do that. And I do not know how to, say for example, there are lots of calculations you can actually do. Apparently, I can go to a website, an e-government website in Norway, and I can plug in a lot of these numbers and it will tell me exactly how much pension I can get if I retire today. But I still do not know how to do it. Apparently there's some form of doing it. And finally though, it's like, sort of they do not dare, they do not feel they're empowered to do that. You know, if all of this, but yeah, I don't have self-efficacy, that could be one reason, but for various reasons. You can't. So this is the problem. So what can we do though? What's the solution? There you go. Did I?
Talking about competence?
There you go. Oh my God. The solution is gone. Yeah. Okay. I do not have a solution. Right. Obviously, the solution is, in my opinion, that you need an entity somewhere in the middle. You have the government service on one end, you have the citizens on the other. To bridge this gap, you need these intermediaries. So now we talk about, you look at this e-commerce literature. You know, this is going to be the end of intermediation. They're gone. Fine. Now, of course, if you want to buy a ticket, for example, an airline ticket, you can go to the site. But then there's so many things here, there, you know, thank you make a trip. The airline ticket is just one aspect. There are all sorts of other things that are involved in accommodation and so on and so forth. So what has happened in e-commerce is you've got this whole a new entity, and then they call intermediaries, for example. They collect the information and then they provide you with that, a complete service, if you will. So those are examples of intermediaries. Now, what I have done in e-government is essentially to say, you heard this phrase G2C. What I'm saying is you need a G to I to C. That has been my work on that. There's actually a paper that came out in the Electronic Journal of IS Developing Countries, which lays it out. Now, what are the different types of intermediaries? Well, if you look at these problems, the first thing is there are intermediaries who simply provide physical access. So example would be all these telecenters, you talked about that, your kiosk, and that's it. This physical, or in fact cyber cafes, you know, or internet cafes. Incidentally, when you talk about this cultural, or the meaning of words, one time I was at a making this presentation, and I was talking about internet cafes. And in the audience there was a French lady, and she c'est pas café. You know, the coffee. So there's a different concept of what a cafe is. For her, it is internet, telecenter, cafe. So they provide this physical access. Now, that's the least that we can actually do. But what about this question of not aware of services? And so the physical access, these people we call, I've forgotten what this called, this type that I named them, but in any case, they are, I think, the facilitators. So, no, it's not facilitating. Anyhow, the second type of intermediaries are what we call direct intermediaries. So what they will actually do is they will access this site for you and then provide this information. So in your scheme, you had these human agents, if I remember right. And what they do is that all these farmers who can't read the SMS messages, they would read it and they will inform them. So essentially they do this for you. They can also find out these various sites. So for example, in my case, I could have gone to somebody, if that sort of intermediary existed. I said, you know what, I want to know something about this pension. They said, all right, I'll do that. You'll go in, do all these, go to these relevant sites, and tell me that this is what you will get as your pension if you retire now, at which point I decided that I can't afford it. So whatever is the case, that's the type of information they provide. Now, intermediaries can be individuals, but they can also be organizations. So there are examples of all these organizations, and what they do is they could either provide these services or they could what we call orchestrate. So they do not do it directly, but they will sort of fund them, and these will be set up. So in Bangladesh, the Grameen Phone, that is Grameen Phone Community Information Centers, the GPCIC. So the intermediary in this case is Grameen Phone. So these centers, these are telecenters that are essentially set up by individual entrepreneurs, but Grameen Phone facilitates this, and they give them, they train them, they select these operators, and they actually but all the financial aspect is the responsibility of the intermediaries themselves. So Grameen Phone is not providing any intermediation themselves, but providing the facilities to do it. And the intermediary in that sense could be a direct intermediary or just simply the one that provides physical access. Then you have another category of intermediaries who do a little bit more than this. So if I come back to this example of this pension person, you sound quite obsessed with pension now, you will also be at my age. They might say, here it is, this is how much you will get. He could stop, or she could stop at that point. But he could also say something like this. You can actually improve your pension situation if you do this, if you do that, etc., etc. Or they could say, you know what, because of the way your record is kept, you are actually getting shortchanged by the government. Here's what we can do, we can sort of intervene on your behalf. So now what we have done is that they're doing something towards empowerment of emancipation and so on. There is an example in, I think it's in Bangalore. It's called, what is it called? Janasayo. Is that in Bangalore? They mediate on behalf of slum dwellers. They set up these, and then essentially they provide all of these services, plus they would go and represent the slum dwellers with the government. So all this violence, all of that thing comes into effect, but they're the ones who do that. So that's another level of intermediation. Right. So, but here are some issues to ponder if we stay within the government context. There's the other side of intermediation. So now I've said all these good things about intermediaries, but there are also intermediaries who are true to this caricature form. They exploit, they plunder and pillage, and they do all sorts sorts of other stuff. So what is it behind them? What is the motivation about this? And we talk about the different types of intermediation. One form of intermediaries that we studied was in Indonesia, and it was a religious organization. That is mosques and madrasas, and that is where they provide all of the things that I have actually mentioned. And then I find out that it's actually not a phenomenon that is unique to Indonesia. Religious organizations in Sri Lanka, they do the same thing. They do these monasteries, if you will. And then, and I was presenting this at a conference, and Krisanti Agder came and said, well, I've studied these in the churches in Greece. And you come up to say, oh, it's all right, you're providing all this, positive effect that they're having, but at the same time you question what else is happening. It's kind of indoctrination and so on and so forth. So my co-author, Fatul Wahid, is from Indonesia, and he was presenting this thing about what we call the unlikely actors, religious or organizations like that, and he felt compelled to introduce himself as, my name is Fatul Wahid, I'm a Muslim, but I'm not a terrorist. So I sort of wince, but then people realize that in that particular context, it probably applies. So that is one aspect. What are the characteristics of intermediaries, and why do they do it, and what's the objective behind that? One of the centers that we studied in Bangladesh, he essentially told us that he's making no money at all. Well, then why do you do this? He said, well, I am, he's actually an activist. He does all sorts of other things in that area. And for him, this is a form of carrying on his activism. So he would do things like download his government form, fill them up, and do that. And say, if I make some money, it's fine, but I've got another business that goes along with it. So the objective was not financial. So it's a means to achieve something else. So you look beyond the immediate effect that you might think about. A little bit about how your example, not a slow time, people felt good. It's a form, it's not that they're getting any services better, but it's changing the view about this thing. So we look at it from that perspective. Then, of course, when it comes to government agencies, intermediation across different agencies, we can always have these intermediation for a specific department, but citizens don't interact with governments for one particular thing. They do it on the basis of something like, say, for example, life event, birth of a child. So you have to register with the child, so that's one department, and you go to the child service, that's another department, and then so on and so forth. So this event is what they're looking at. And many a times you go to see government service, you go and you find that you have to deal with many different departments. So where does this intermediation come into play? And in fact, I had a friend who was trying to put her son through this system in Norway, and now you're talking about a country where it is very much developed, at least that's what they like to think, in terms of these government services. But the child has some problems, like developmentally disabled in some way. So she has to deal with many different departments, and she got fed up. So what she ended up doing was basically becoming an intermediary for many different people. So any other mothers who had this problem would come to her and she said, I know what to do. But it is physical, there was no ICT involved in here. Right, and sustainability is always an issue. What makes something sustainable? Who pays the bills at the end of the day? Now, Bjorn Furukol, with whom I work on the side, his thesis was something about a concept called demand sustainability. In very simple terms, if you can sustain demand, it becomes sustainable. Now, I'll give you an example which is actually very good to understand this concept, but probably not very ethical. And that's to do with the drug problem. You think about drug addicts. It's a very sustainable trade. Yeah, it costs a lot of money. And a lot of these drug addicts they don't have the resources. But where do they get the money? How is this demand for that. And if there's a demand, if demand is sustained, people find ways of doing it. You know, in our study of the internet cafe use in Tanzania, some people were spending about 30% of the monthly income going into this because they felt that there was something that was meeting the needs. So there are other aspects. Now, so this is an intermediate, this is an e-government context, and how do we go beyond to the general? So conceptualizing different intermediary types, and this is we came up with a form of in general. So the dimensions. When we say, well, I've got this framework of topology. What are the dimensions? So we use this called building blocks of theory development by Wetton. And what you have used that as well. There are many different forms, 5W1H, 4W3H, whatever. So essentially these are the ones, what the essential variables, parameters of the problem. In our case, it's the essential services provider, intermediaries, the users, and how, why, and who together with where and when, and so on. Sometimes we choose to use one dimension and not the other. Then we added a fifth dimension. Anybody remember the fifth dimension? They had a very famous song in the 1960s. It's called Hair.
Of course, I remember everything that's old. I remember. Want me to sing it to you?
Yeah. When the moon is in the seventh heaven, that's a big one. Anyway, and instead of context, I distinguish whether it is general internet access specific. But I like, now I'll borrow your term focus. Actually, it's better than context. Focus is in general or in a specific area. And this is what we came up with. You can read this because oh, you can. It's a cut and pasted from an article. And this should be coming up next somewhere. So here's the what and who and so on and so forth. And these are the examples, and these are references, so people, you know, here's a lesson for PhD students. Anytime they come up with some framework, and even if it looks very good, they will say, why should I accept it? What is it? So you need a reference somewhere. So now you have got, so you needed to put it. You know, I want to just point one thing out. It's in Maung and the various intermediate roles. You've got individual organizations. Technology itself can be an intermediary. So this example here called e-Qalam, it's all digital pen. This is a system that was developed in Malaysia. And essentially it's a digital pen for people who do not read Arabic to read the Quran. You know. And while it was being launched, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, he said something about, well, we come up with all these various technological solutions, but adoption requires a lot more than that. We do not have the capabilities, because of the cultural issues, and so on. So he actually made the case for intermediaries in it. So here are some of these other stuff that they actually do. So I'll change this to focus general interaction of specific areas. Right. So what are the challenges, issues to ponder? Well, there is actually a difference between intermediation and mediation. And I got this insight when I started reading in earnest academic theory. And Latour spends a great deal of time trying to explain what is the difference. Now it's in different contexts, mind you. So I have to be a little bit careful for two reasons. Because I'm adopting it to another context. And secondly, because I do not know much about it here. But this is how I read it. Any symbol that just is called the intermediation simply carries that. You know, it doesn't do anything, it doesn't add any value to this. So if you talk about a digital divide, you talk about somebody who is, a stylish person, as opposed to somebody like me. Look at it. So look at what Rahul is wearing, a nice suit with tie and so on, and I'm not. So this notion of shirt is an intermediation because it doesn't. There will be a difference between stylish people and non-stylish people, irrespective of what I can see. So that is the form. But there can also be certain symbols that add to the meaning. So if you think about the different types of intermediaries, providing physical access or facilitating or even combining information and then conveying it, those are all forms of intermediation. But once you start thinking in terms of activism, and then I'm acting on somebody's behalf, then it becomes mediation, because I want to change the relationship. All the other people didn't want to change the relationship, unless, well, not explicitly anyhow. I do this and so. So that's one aspect. The other thing is, well, all of this is well and good, but what are the theoretical premises behind it? Now, why is a theoretical premise important? Because whatever reason theory is important for, and it means that we abstract it to some level. I can give all sorts of examples of this intermediation. But if I can't explain why this thing happens, why the process happens, what the theory behind it, it's not. So what are the theories that we can actually look at? So if you have to look at how people view this, so active network theory is a good example. I just don't know much about it. I think structuration is another that I've actually looked at it, about the form of information and what people mean in this. How did the intermediaries evolve to that particular point? Institutional theory is another thing that we have to look at. And when we talk about the role of intermediaries, why do they do it, motivation, etc. So you can bring in various motivational theories, that can bring in stakeholder theory and so on. There are lots of various different theoretical premises that are there. Dynamism of intermediaries, I didn't know what word to use, so that's why I used dynamism. The point is, whenever you have this classification of anything, you say, well, this type of intermediary, that type of intermediary, well, people don't remain that. Okay, I can start by simply operating a cyber cafe and you get it and physical access. That's fine, so I'm one type. Well, a few months later, if I see somebody sitting around and can't do anything, I say, what are you looking for? I say, well, I'm looking for my pension, etc. So let me help you. So now I have evolved from this simple physical to that. And then and sometimes I say this and somebody comes up and says, look, you have provided this information, but what good is it? And the police is still coming up and beating everybody up, so what is the point? And I said, oh yeah, that's... at first I would say, that's not my problem. But after a few months I might say, this is not right. So now I will start mediating on your behalf. So you file this Logwani complaint about the police beat up. Now I will file something saying, look at the police, what they're doing, the police brutality. So now I have moved on to a active mediation role. So people move at this. And how do they do that? This is one. The other thing that actually muddles the whole thing is the same person can be various types of intermediary at the same time. So in the morning, somebody comes up, wants to access this net. I said, fine, here's the computer, you pay whatever you're going to use it. So I've been just a simple provider. And then like half an hour later, somebody comes up and says, oh, I don't know what this information is. I said, fine, I'll find it for you. I've done that. And then in the evening, somebody comes up and says, I have got this problem, I'm a mediator, I will sort of campaign for you, or I'll fight for your rights. And worse is I can do it for one group and I may not do it for another group. So it's not like, you cannot be compartmentalized. So what is it that we need to study here? So probably intermediation, mediation is more interesting to study than actually intermediary class. But it's a beginning. And of course, sustainability is always an issue. Where did I lose I lost the whole slide. Exactly, it was quite nice, and I was quite proud of it. I need an intermediary to do these PowerPoints. There you go.
Okay, any questions or comments to that?
Maybe you should be the intermediary to ask the questions on
Yeah, I think there was one in the back first.